Hey guys, it's Angelo, and welcome to the first look of the Discipline Priest in the World of Warcraft Shadowlands Alpha. The Disc Priest is seeing a few, yet very interesting changes so far, and will definitely be holding on to its current playstyle, however with a few interesting changes that give the playstyle a lot more flavor. From old abilities returning, to some of the ones from Battle for Azeroth seeing some changes, the spec is arguably the most engaging and diverse priest spec to play, and this may also be the case in WoW's upcoming expansion. Now, keep in mind that everything you are about to see is still in the early alpha, so things are subject to change, and in fact, very likely will. In this first look video, I will cover everything that has changed up to this point, giving you guys detailed insights at the structure of this new Discipline Priest. Specifically, we'll be addressing current class changes, so talents, abilities, and removed aspects of the class, as well as giving you my opinion on how the spec is currently looking when considering this for the actual Shadowlands release. Kind of like a personal feedback thing, in hopes that the developers will watch this. Now, if you would like to join the discussion with all things related to the priest, be sure to join our Discord server with the link in the description box, of course, and while you're at it, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, as I've seen that over 90% of you guys watching my videos within the last 28 days aren't subscribed. I'll be making a load more Shadowlands videos in the upcoming weeks and months, so be sure to stay informed. Good, now that being said, and without holding you guys up any longer, let's go right ahead and have a look. Alright, so let's start us off with our abilities. In Shadowlands, all priests will have access to certain abilities, no matter their spec. There are quite a few spells new or returning here for the Disc Priest, as with all other priest specs, and those are Mind Blast, Mind Soothe, Power Infusion, Desperate Prayer, and Shadow Word Death. The most interesting new spells here are Mind Blast, which will play an important role in our rotation, but more on that later, and Shadow Word Death, which also has an interesting twist to it, which we will discuss during the according section of this video. We also have some new Covenant abilities, which are part of the new idea of the Covenants in Shadowlands, granting you various different abilities depending on your class and your spec. I will go into greater detail with those in a separate video in order to keep this one a bit more structured. Once that is done, of course, the link should pop up on your screen pretty much now. For now, we'll just give them a brief rundown. The Boon of the Ascended from the Kyrians grants us access to the Ascended Nova, which replaces Smite during its duration and is essentially a heavy AoE bombing ability. Mind Games from the Venthyr, which is a single target damage spell with a small twist which restores mana. Unholy Nova from the Necrolords, which is an AoE dot spread, and Fey Blessings from the Night Fae, which for Discipline Priests grants our Shadow Mend and Mind Blast damage reduction on that given target and grants allies mana for each Power Word shield applied to them, while Power Word Radiance reduces the cooldown of allied abilities. Very interesting so far, and again, those will be covered in a separate video. Good. Next up, we'll be taking a look at our talents. Now currently, there are only a few changes here, but once again, those are pretty interesting, so let's figure them out. So let's take a look at our talents. No big changes here, very similar to the Shadow Priest, but interesting ones starting in our level 40 talent row. Shadow Covenant has received a rework, and this is actually great news. It now instantly heals the target and 4 other injured allies within 30 yards, and now increases the shadow damage you deal by 25% for 7 seconds. During this time, however, you are unable to cast any holy spells, and this is actually a change I like a lot so far and have been toying around with on the alpha, as this, paired with Schism, can lead to some very strong Shadow Word Death and Shadow Word Pain damage spikes. This does still seem a little buggy on the alpha, as I am still able to cast pretty much all of my holy spells, which obviously shouldn't be the case. In theory though, this will enable Shadow Covenant to increase the damage you deal and therefore the healing you deal by a pretty formidable amount, especially when paired with Mind Blast and Shadow Fiend. Our next talent change comes in our level 50 and therefore final talent row. Keep in mind, max level in Shadowlands is level 60. where Lenience has been completely removed, and instead we now have Light's Caress, a brand new talent. Allies are healed when they enter or gain the benefit of your Power Word barrier, and are healed once more if they are underneath the protection of the barrier once it expires. This is honestly a decent talent, but in comparison to Lenience, it's difficult to say at this point in time whether or not it is a justified or competitive replacement. Lenience was very strong in Mythic Plus, essentially the go-to talent really, and it'll remain to be seen how this will affect the disc in Mythic Plus as a whole. This could also make Luminous Barrier more attractive to players as well. So far, so good. Let's take a look at our spell changes now, and here's where the most changes come into play. It's important to state here that some abilities now have ranks, and will not unlock their full potential until their second rank. Power Word Radiance, for example, will now not have a second charge until it is at rank 2, which will be at some point during the leveling phase. Of course, all of this is still work in progress. Both Power Word Radiance and Shadow Mend have had their base mana costs bumped up from 2.7 and 3% to 3.4 and 3.5% respectively. Penance has had its mana cost changed from 2% base mana to 1.8%, while the most interesting change comes in the form of Mind Blast. Mind Blast has been added as a spell and has received the old passive of Smite, while that passive of course no longer works with Smite at all. Instead of Smite, it is now Mind Blast, which prevents the next flat amount of damage dealt by the damaged enemy, while Smite will simply be your damage filler now. The final filler we have will be in the form of Shadow Word Death, which is now also a spell, as mentioned before, however it does not trigger our Atonement. These changes are all in all interesting, but I do try to be completely honest in these videos, so I'll state the pros and the cons from my point of view. The first issue I'd like to address is Shadow Word Death. Shadow Word Death is in and of itself a great addition to the Disc Priest, as it simply offers more tools to deal damage with. Personally though, I feel as if it does not fit into the spec, neither in our healing rotation, as it does not trigger Atonement, nor really in our damage rotation, as that is heavily reliant upon having to heal our allies. This means that Shadow Word Death can only be used when the global cooldown can be disposed of if there is nothing to heal. But even though the Disc Priest will most likely want to place atonements on targets during this time, of course, or refresh dots, or make use of spells like Mind Blast or Schism in order to counter the incoming damage with healing and with absorption. Now, it feels as if you really want to use Shadow Word Death, but honestly you can't really make any use of it because you're scared that if the global cooldown is indeed wasted, you will run into problems. Now, my personal fix for this would be to simply add Shadow Word Death to the Atonement triggers. It doesn't do much damage, meaning it'll do even less healing anyway, however, it'd be much more inclined, or rather I would be much more inclined to use it. If balancing this would become an issue, perhaps too much healing or too much damage output, perhaps the individual modifier for that spell can be added, letting it heal less via Atonement or simply letting it deal less damage. Another big problem with this in my opinion is the fact that it's on the global cooldown. This makes it less attractive to use, especially in the early stages of Shadowlands where the heroic dungeons or regular mythic dungeons will still be pretty challenging. In these times that the Discipline Priest is honestly the most difficult to play, or rather proves itself the most challenging, Shadow Word Death may fall a little bit flat, and we need every single global cooldown we have available, of course, in order to keep the group alive. Now, the next aspect I want to address is Mind Blast. Mind Blast in our rotation is actually pretty cool, and that definitely feels like a disc spell and gives us a more versatile toolkit with more spells in it. I actually have nothing negative to say about the implementation of Mind Blast, as it feels very in place and gives us another spell to keep on cooldown. Same of course goes for the new Shadow Covenant, which I enjoy a lot, and it provides a damage alternative to Sins of the Many, while also offering very strong 5-man healing. Currently, of course the spec overall still plays itself pretty slow, but that was to be expected with the removal of corruption effects, Azurite traits, and Azurite essences. Alright guys, that'll conclude our first look for the Discipline Priest on the Shadowlands Alpha. Let me know what you think. How are you enjoying these changes so far? Anything you think feels out of place, anything you wish to see added or removed, be sure to let me know in the comment section below, and be sure to tell the developers. I'll of course be sure to keep you updated on the spec's development, but next up we'll be taking a first look at the Holy Priest, and until then, thank you so much for watching. Special thanks to my supporters from Patreon, and if you have enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, as it helps me out a lot, and feel free to subscribe to stay updated on the content of this channel. As always, have a good one my friends, enjoy patch 8.3, get excited for Shadowlands, and I will see you all in the next one.